In this video, we're going to talk about phylum Annelida, and the annelids are our segmented worms. And remember that these annelids are in the superphylum Lophotrochophores. They are protostomes. They have bilateral symmetry. They have true specialized tissues, and they are animals. Some general information about the annelids is they are known as segmented worms, and they have something called metamerism. And what this is that each of these segments, so you can see these kind of individual little ridges here, each one of these segments has its own set of internal structures. And so we'll look at that in more detail on a different slide. To grow, they essentially just add more segments. They do have some different regions. So they've got the head region. So they do have some cephalization. They have a body, and then they have a tail region known as the pygidium. The epidermis is the kind of the outer covering of an organism. So it's kind of like the skin, might be a little bit different in structure than the skin that you might be familiar with, but it's their version of skin. They also have a collagenous cuticle that is superficial to the skin. And remember that collagen is a kind of a tough but flexible protein. They have circular and longitudinal muscles that are located deep to the epidermis, so inside their body, and this is what allows them to crawl. So if you've ever seen an inchworm, kind of crawl along, you know that they are able to essentially kind of pull themselves along, and they can make themselves kind of shorter and fatter or longer and skinnier. They also have these setae, which are these chitinous bristles anchored in the epidermis. And you can see those on these pictures here. These little extensions are the setae. Each has its own muscle and can move on its own. And they are located on these appendages called parapodia. Different types of annelids feed in different ways. There are some that are filter feeders that have these feather-like appendages that help to capture food as water goes over the appendages. Some of them are predators, so they might have tentacles, jaws, or an eversible pharynx to capture prey. Eversible basically means that it can be turned inside out. And so essentially it can be kind of stuck out of the body and then kind of grab food and then sucked back in. Some of them suck blood, so leeches are in the phylum Annelida. And then earthworms are probably the most kind of well known in this phylum, and they collect small organisms in the soil as they're moving around, and that's what they eat. Now, before we talk about the digestive tract, I kind of want to revisit that concept of metamerism. And this is that segmentation. And in this picture, we're kind of looking at a cut open annelid, and we've got two segments that are being shown. And you can see how the segments are kind of identical to each other. So for example, this one has a nephridium and this one has a nephridium. This one has a kind of its own nerve cords with a connection here. This one you can't see it, but it also has that. Now revisiting the digestive system, they do have a complete digestive tract, which means that food comes in one direction and leaves at the other end. So they have a mouth, a muscular pharynx, which is basically like a throat region, an esophagus, which is a muscular tube that leads to the crop and gizzard, which is kind of like the stomach, And then that leads to the intestines, which eventually, well, the intestines absorb nutrients, and then the waste products are excreted out of the anus. Most annelids have a closed circulatory system. This means that the blood is contained within vessels, as opposed to something called a hemocoel. And a hemocoel is where blood kind of just mixed with all the body fluids inside the body. But in this case, you can see that there are blood vessels that contain that blood. For respiration, gas exchange occurs across the surface of the body, and so they don't have things like lungs or gills. For excretion, to get rid of metabolic waste products, and this is similar to the urinary system. They have something called a metanephridia, which is a kind of like a type of a primitive kidney. So it acts kind of like a kidney, but not quite a fully developed kidney. They do have a well-developed nervous system with these nerve cords that kind of run along the length of the body. And then the nerve cords are connected by this ganglion in each segment. Annelids come in a couple of different varieties. So one class is called class Polychaeta, which means many bristles on the parapodia. And these are marine worms, and these are going to be your filter feeders. And so those kind of feathery-like appendages are what capture their food. Class Oligochaeta means few bristles, and those are going to be the earthworms. So I should go back and say poly means many. Oligo means some or few. And then class Herodinea make up the leeches, which are the blood-sucking annelids. And they have suckers on both ends to help them attach to their host, and then they're able to suck the blood from both ends.